Walter Isaacson, now that you have sat down, please rise again and come and speak to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored, especially following in the footsteps of good Dr. Franklin, who had the first of these degrees. Chancellor Gates had the wonderful honor of saying in his talk, "What we taught you here at William and Mary." It befalls upon me, as the last speaker between now and you getting your diplomas, to reveal to you what we forgot to tell you. I've been allotted 14 minutes for this task, which shows that your administration thinks there isn't much that they forgot to tell you. So I will speak quickly about all the things we did forget to tell you. We taught you here to be individual achievers. We celebrated individual achievement and even singular visionaries. What we forgot to tell you is that in the real world, it's not about singular achievement. It's about teamwork. It's about being able to collaborate. We had a word for it here, collaboration. We called it cheating. When you get to the real world, you're going to learn that innovation is a team sport and that success is a collaborative effort. The three great inventions of our time, the computer, the microchip, and the internet, with all due respect to Al Gore, nobody knows who invented them. And the reason is they were invented collaboratively by great teams. Take just the internet, for example. It was invented at the Defense Department as a way to tie together the computers they had given to great research universities like William and Mary so that they could share resources. And they told the research universities that they just had to come up with the protocols that allowed this packet-based, web-based system to communicate with each other. And being great research university professors, they did what research professors always do. They assigned the task to their graduate students. And 30 graduate students from universities around this country decided to invent the internet and to do it collaboratively. And in order to make it collaborative rather than top-down or authoritarian, they assigned the youngest of the graduate students to write the notes of what they decided to do. So if they figured out that maybe the packet should have an address header and that when they recombined and what would be the rules if one of the packets didn't make it, these things, Stephen Crocker, the young graduate student, decided should not be called rules or regulations. He called them requests for comment, which was a way to say we're all involved in doing it collaboratively. That's a pretty cool way to invent the most important network ever invented, but what's particularly cool is that's still how the internet is being built. We're up to 7,900 or so in the RFC process, the request for comment process. And the DNA of that means that we have created a digital revolution and an economy that's peer-to-peer and collaborative. When I was at Time magazine, we wrote that the reason it was done this way was so that it would survive a Russian nuclear attack. If you take out a central hub of a traditional network, you knock out huge parts of the network. But with this peer-to-peer network, you take out a node, it just knows how to route around it. We got a letter from Steve Crocker saying, no, we did not do it to help fight the Russians. I mean, you have to remember, we were graduate students in the 1960s. Why were we graduate students? We were avoiding the draft. So we weren't doing it for that reason. Time was arrogant and did not print his letter saying we had a better source. And when Steve Crocker reminded me of this many years later, I went back to see the better source. The better source was a guy named Steve Lukasich at the Pentagon who said, yes, we were doing it that way to survive a Russian attack, but we didn't tell the graduate students, of course. They were all draft dodgers. We just gave them the assignment. He said, so tell Crocker that he was on the bottom and I was on the top. So he didn't know what was happening. When I told Crocker, he nodded and he said, you tell Lukasich, I was on the bottom, and he was on the top. So he didn't know what was happening. And that is the essence of the peer-to-peer distributed collaborative network that will determine our economy for the rest of your careers. And it depends on peer-to-peer collaboration. The first honorand of this college, Dr. Franklin, knew that well. He was the glue who pulled together a team of founders that wasn't one individual. It wasn't just like you needed a George Washington. You also needed really young, smart people like Madison and Jefferson, and passionate people like Samuel Adams and his cousin John, and somebody like Franklin who knew how to build a team. And when they were deciding to do a declaration to explain why we were at war, Continental Congress appointed a committee to do it. It may have been the last time Congress appointed a good committee. It was Benjamin Franklin, just having gotten his degree from here. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were on it. Pretty good committee. And if you look at the writing of the first draft and second draft of that document, you can see what teamwork and collaboration does. Dr. Hayden behind me has the first draft in the Library of Congress. It's a remarkable document that I hope you will display often. If you look at it, you look at the greatest sentence ever written by mankind, the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence, and you see the collaborative effort as opposed to Thomas Jefferson writing it alone. Jefferson in that draft begins, "We hold these truths to be sacred." If you look at the draft of the Library of Congress, there's Benjamin Franklin's printer's pen crossing with the backslashes the word sacred and writing in self-evident, saying that we're trying to create a new type of nation in which our rights come from the consent of the governed, rationality and reason, rather than the dictates of a religion. But the sentence goes on, endowed with certain inalienable rights. There's John Adams' handwriting. Endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So you can see in this one collaborative effort, our founders working as a team to balance the role of divine providence and the role of rationality and reason in the creation of our rights. Would it be today that we could be as wise as they were to understand such a balance? One of the things we also taught you was that you were either going to be focused on science and math, or you were going to be focused on the humanities and the arts. There was a distinction between the two, and the people doing science and math, people said, might get the better jobs, people doing the humanities. What we forgot to tell you is that it's not about either science or the humanities. The people who will be the most successful are those who can straddle the two, those who understand the beauty of a Leonardo da Vinci brushstroke, but also that an equation is an equally beautiful brushstroke of the way nature is. And whether it's Leonardo da Vinci and Vitruvian Man combining the humanities and technology, or Steve Jobs doing it by creating beauty with an iPhone or an iPod, Steve Jobs always ended his product launches with that street sign of an intersection, the intersection of the humanities and technology. He said that is where the value will be created. So if you love the humanities, I want you to make sure you, in the next few years, learn to love rather than joke about not being able to understand the beauty of math. And if you're an engineer, make sure you read some of Lord Byron's poetry. It was Lord Byron's daughter, Ada Lovelace, in the 1830s and 40s, who first came up with the idea of a general-purpose computer, and she did so because she had the poetic sensibilities of her father, Lord Byron. But her mother, Lady Byron, was not particularly fond of Lord Byron by that point. If you know anything about Lord Byron, you understand too much of a romantic poet for Lady Byron's taste, and had Ada tutored only in mathematics, as if knowing math would be an antidote to being a romantic poet. Instead, Ada Lovelace creates the idea of what she calls romantic science, or poetical science. And she's able to understand that the punch cards teaching the looms of industrial England how to do patterns could be made in ways that they could do anything notated in symbols. And she writes the first algorithms for a numerical calculator in order to create what becomes a general-purpose computer. That ability to stand at the intersection is what Ada Lovelace, the first great computer scientist of the 1840s, bequeathed to us. And that's one of the things you'll have to relearn, is that you must love the beauty of both the arts and the science. We also taught you here the limits of the possible and how to be practical. What we forgot to tell you is that every now and then, you have to test the limits of the possible. You have to push to distort reality, as Steve Jobs would say. Steve's reality distortion field was rather famous when they first, when he and Wozniak were first doing the computer game. He told Woz, "You've got to program it by this weekend, because we have to get back to the apple farm where they worked," hence the name of the company they ended up founding. Woz said, "There's no way. You can't possibly code breakout that quickly." Steve had gone to India and from his guru had learned to stare without blinking at people and say, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." Woz said he got so totally freaked out that he went back and stayed up 3 nights in a row and coded the game Breakout. Over and over again, you see that pushing of the bounds to drive people crazy, but also to drive them to do things they didn't think they could do. For example, later on, when Steve is doing the original Macintosh, it takes 98 seconds to boot up. It was almost as bad as a Microsoft machine. So Steve tells Larry Kenyon, "You got to save 28 seconds off the boot up time." Kenyon says, "No way. Look at the code." Steve stares at him without blinking and says, "Don't be afraid. You can do it." Kenyon said, "I got so freaked out, went to my cubicle, and by the end of the week, I'd shaved 48 seconds off the boot-up time." Over and over again, my last example will be the wonderful iPhone. When Steve was going to come out with the iPhone, he wanted it not to have a junky plastic cover, but a beautiful piece of glass that wouldn't scratch. He went looking. The glass from China didn't meet his specifications. Finally, he went to Corning Glass, and said, "Can you do it?" to Wendell Weeks, the CEO of Corning. And Weeks said, "Well, we came up with a process once called Gorilla Glass, but we've never been able to put it into practice, but it would work this way." Steve looked at the formulas and went through it and said, "Yes, that's what I want, and I want this much by September, because we're shipping the phone in October." And Weeks said, "No, you didn't hear me. We've never actually made this. We can't." I went up to Corning, New York, because I'm an old-fashioned reporter. I wanted to hear this firsthand. Weeks told me it was amazing. The guy just sat there and stared at me without blinking and said, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." After the meeting, Wendell Weeks called a plant manager for Corning in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, and said, "Switch over to making Gorilla Glass." And the plant manager said, "Okay, we'll do it in a couple of months once we're doing flat screen." He said, "No, do it tomorrow." Plant manager started to protest, and Weeks told me, I just kept telling him over the phone, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." The upshot is, by the way, when you pull out your iPhone, every iPhone that shipped that year and every iPhone and iPad ever since then has had Gorilla Glass made by Corning Glass in America because of Steve's reality distortion field. And even yesterday, you may have seen, Apple made a $200 million investment in Corning. That's the value of a reality distortion field. Also, we taught you to meet deadlines, to turn in things on time. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But occasionally in life, you do have to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. When Steve was shipping that original Macintosh, he looked inside and saw the circuit board. And he said to the engineers, "The circuit board is ugly." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the chips aren't beautiful. They're not lined up straight." They said, "Well, you can't even open this thing. You can't even see it. Nobody will know." Steve said, "Yes, but you will know." He told the story of when his father, when Steve was 6, as he helped his father build a fence around the house, and his father made him make the back of the fence as beautiful as the front, even though nobody would see it, saying, "You will know." They held up shipping the original Macintosh for 6 weeks so the engineers can make the circuit board inside beautiful, because beauty matters. And if you truly believe that beauty matters, you realize it's even the beauty of the parts unseen that matter. And so when they finally did ship, he had everybody sign a whiteboard, and they engraved it on the inside of the Mac, Stephen P. Jobs, all in lowercase, right in the middle, their signatures, where nobody would see it and nobody would ever know. But Steve said, real artists sign their work. We also taught you received wisdom. The important thing is to know how to question received wisdom. A patent clerk, Albert Einstein, who could not get his doctoral degree because they couldn't figure out his doctoral dissertation at the Zurich Polytech, is a third-class examiner in the patent office. But he questions, as he's looking at devices to synchronize clocks, the notion that if you're traveling towards one clock, it'll look different, the synchronization, than if you're traveling really fast to the other clock. He questions the most important piece of received wisdom in physics of his time, the first sentence of Newton's Principia, which says time marches along second by second, no matter how we observe it. And this patent clerk said, how would we know that? How would we test that? And thus he comes up with the theory of relativity. And that always means, if you're going to question received wisdom, just be passionately curious. Einstein questioned it because when he was 6 years old, he was given a compass. And the needle kept twitching and pointing north, and his father showed it to him. He was mesmerized because nothing touches that needle. Why does it move? Why does it point north? And he said he walked around for days on end, worrying about this. Now, you and I remember getting a compass when we were age 6 or 7. And it's kind of cool, the needle, and then we go, oh, we're onto something, oh, look, a dead squirrel, and we're onto something else. The rest of his life, from that time as a patent clerk to his deathbed, he's still trying to figure out what's an electromagnetic wave, how does it interact with particles. Whether it's Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, they question the most obvious things, including all three of them. Why is the sky blue? We notice that every day. We don't ask curiously what causes the light waves to diffract. They were all curious about the most mundane of all things. And finally, we tell you to stand firm on principle. That's a really important piece of honor. What we forgot to tell you is that whether it's collaboration or democracy, sometimes it's about compromise. At the Constitutional Convention, Ben Franklin was the oldest person in the room. He was twice as old as the average age of the people there. But when they had the big fight on the big state, little states issue, and the Connecticut Compromise had gone down in flames, Benjamin Franklin got up and he said, when we were young tradesmen in Philadelphia, right here, right near Independence Hall where they were meeting, he said, and we had a joint of wood that didn't fit together. We'd take a little from one side and pick a little from the other until we had a joint that would hold for centuries. And so, too, we here at this convention must each part with some of our demands. His point was that compromisers do not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. It's something else that we forgot to tell you, and which, unfortunately today, is now needed more than ever before. And finally, we taught you that you were special. You were exclusive. You got into this exclusive place and went further and further up the rung of exclusivity. When I was graduating, I got this sermon as well from the Reverend Peter Gomes, who was the minister of the chapel where I went. And he said, what we forgot to tell you is it's not about exclusivity, it's about inclusivity. It's about how many people you include in the journey, not how many people you climb over in the journey. One of the guys in the class came up to the Reverend Gomes, and he said, Reverend Gomes asked, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And the classmate says, I want to be successful. I want to be powerful. I might even want to be president someday. Your university has turned out many successful people. It's turned out many powerful people. It's even turned out 3 presidents. But the important thing, and what we forgot to tell you, is that it's more important to turn out good people. People who are going to try to include others in every step of the way. There are probably people of my generation concluding their speeches at college graduations by saying, follow your passion. I'm saying aim higher. It isn't about your silly little passion. It's about connecting your passion to something larger than yourselves, to a community, to a nation, and to a world, to make sure all that's connected. When Stephen Jobs lay dying 6 years ago, I asked him about that. I said, what was your mission? What did you try to do? And he said, I thought that life is like a river. And I used to think when I was young that it mattered how much you were able to take out of the river, all the wonderful products and ideas and services that other people had put in the river. If you were successful, you got a lot out of that river. What I've learned now, it's not about what you take out of the river, but what you put into the river. And as for Dr. Franklin, during his lifetime, he donated to the building fund of each and every church that was built in Philadelphia. At one point, they were building a new hall next to Independence Hall, still called the New Hall, and he wrote the fundraising document. And he said, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send somebody here to teach us Islam and to preach to us about the Prophet Muhammad, we should offer a pulpit and listen, for we might learn. And on his deathbed, he was the largest individual contributor to the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, the first synagogue built in Philadelphia. So when he died, instead of his minister accompanying him to the grave, all 35 ministers, preachers, and priests of Philadelphia linked arms with the rabbi of the Jews and marched with him to that grave. It was that type of inclusivity that they were fighting for 300 years ago, and that's what we're still fighting for, both abroad and at home, and is your mission as you leave this college. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you.